This is the second annual Global Readathon of the Center for Studies on Africa and its Diaspora, coming to you live from Georgia State University in Atlanta. Prepare for an epic journey as we celebrate Black History Month and dare to crown the greatest book of all time. Here is our host, former CNN anchor and White House correspondent, Suzanne Malveaux.
We have enlisted some professionals to do this hard job, and we are talking about very special people, GSU librarians. They do it all. Well, they will be the ones voting after hearing these arguments from Atlanta area professors who nominated these books. So I want to introduce you to those professors. Take a look.
Here are the contestants. In this corner, Dr. Lakita Burnett Bailey, nominating Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. And in this corner, Dr. Elizabeth West, nominating Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. Dr. Maurice Hobson argues for the Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois. Dr. Renee Shadaman for Beloved by Toni Morrison. Dr. Heather Scott for I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. And Dr. Corey Claiborne for Mama Day by Gloria Naylor.
Okay, this is going to be fun. Greatest of all time. You know, these professors are pretty serious about this. I'm surprised. They got a lot of fight. So you know the contenders. We're going to hear from them. They're telling us a little bit about themselves, the reason they believe in their book, that it is the greatest of all time. Take a look.
I just want to make sure, you know, we re-emphasize here the literary nature and relevance of what we're doing here, and to qualify for those who might be out there listening to us thinking that we have a lot of audacity to think that we can, in these few moments, assert what the greatest literary work is in all time for the African American canon, which expands centuries. The scope of the books we've chosen only expand 100 years. And we're talking about a tradition, again, that expands a couple of hundred years. So we want to qualify what we're doing there. So we're not so much a definitive assertion of the greatest, but within the realm of the small body, the pool that we have here. This is the selection that we have. And ultimately, we're excited about promoting reading and engaging what are arguably the top liners of African American literary works. And most of all, I'm hoping we're going to have a lot of fun with this. So on the rapid fire, because I'm the moderator and I got to decide, I'm going to start us off. My book is Zora Neale Hurston, published in 1937 by the GOAT of African American women writers. Their Eyes Were Watching God, to my mind, is, if not the, but one of the most innovative literary works by an African American, and that is, independent of gender. It is a remarkable book that is unapologetically Black, unapologetically woman, as well as defiant. And it is a celebration of African American culture, unvetted, but speaking to what some might call the universal spirit of the human self. Dr. Hobson.
My selection is The Souls of Black Folk by William Edward Burghardt Du Bois. In the 1870s, when we see the arrival of written African-American history, oftentimes that literature was written to convince white people that black people were not savages. However, The Souls of Black Folk, written in 1903, is a byproduct of W.E.B. Du Bois moving to Atlanta and being able to engage in how we understand black life, particularly in a city that has risen after the Civil War. But what Du Bois is also able to do here is he's able to marry the intellectual tradition with the folk tradition and create and present a creative narrative. And as a result of this, these sketches and essays give us an understanding that actually call race, class, and even gender to some extent on the carpet to realize that the problem of the 20th century or the problem of the 21st century is the problem of the color line.
Hello, my name is Renee Shadaman, and I'm presenting Beloved by Toni Morrison. And this text has always been my goat. And mainly, what is most remarkable to me is the vastness of her canvas. I've been listening to this on tape again in preparation for today, and I feel like it's 3 novels combined into one. The story, the painful story of recollections of slavery, the recounting of the pains and joys of life after emancipation or freedom, and also the reflections on what it means to look to your past and to try to come to terms with it in order to move forward. I also want to say that Beloved is one of the most banned books, and that must mean it's doing something right.
My book for today is Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. This book was originally written in 1947. To me, this book is the GOAT because it deals with this idea of the impact of racism and specifically how racism is played out in a number of ways. And so I think that if anyone ever wants to understand racism in the United States, this is an essential text to read about being visible, being seen, and not in the present sense of I can visibly see you, but also see your soul, see your humanity.
Okay, I want to introduce my book, Gloria Naylor's Mama Day. It's her 3rd novel, published in 1988. And I will say that this is the GOAT because it's a Lillian Smith award-winning book that is about African-American folklore and mythology, the legacy of slavery, love, and the connection to our ancestors. And I will say that this book actually, through its masterful storytelling, connects to all of the stories that are represented at this table today.
I come as one, but I stand as 10,000. These words spoken by Dr. Maya Angelou have sustained many a woman as they prepare for battle in a literal and figurative sense. In Dr. Angelou's autobiographical memoir, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, we are reminded as a people of the power of triumph through adversity, the impact of being seen, and the distance that the love of family can carry us as we find our voice. The impact across generations is indisputable, and thus the GOAT.
All right, thank you everyone. I'm feeling a little sweat after hearing from everybody, but I feel pretty confident about my nomination.
I want to begin by reminding you all from another author that we definitely recognize as one of the GOATs in our African-American canon. But he has this to say about I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings liberates the reader into life simply because Maya Angelou confronts her own life with such a moving wonder, such a luminous dignity. Words from James Baldwin. I offer to you that this book offers a blueprint for the quintessential memoir. Angelou invites readers to share in her journey with her own authentic voice, which we know is very important. That authenticity rings throughout the story, while also capturing moments in history that have a profound and lasting impact on the African American community. This book, quite simply, is the origin story of a literary hero.
Wow, I don't know if I can follow that. Okay, so, okay, I'll say this about Mama Day. Many people think of The Women of Brewster's Place as Naylor's most famous book because it was made into a TV miniseries by Oprah Winfrey. It won a National Book Award, but this is her most important book. And I think that what we have to talk about is how you can't have Women of Brewster's Place. I think you can't have a lot of other books had you not had this book. So this comes back to make us understand Maya Angelou's story, to make us understand the souls of Black folks, to make us understand Invisible Man, and also one of the people who inspired her, but I think that she extended the story, Zora Hurston, because she worked as an archivist, really getting the story of Black people. And the reason why I think you need to start with the story is because it started where African Americans start, in the Sea Islands of South Carolina, right? That is our Ellis Island. That is where African Americans need to think about where they created themselves. And so the book starts with the line of W.E.B, but then it goes out for literally, I think, for millions of us, and says that if you come here, if you know your lineage, you will understand what it means to be Black in America. Right? And so Willow Springs is a fictional place where she locates this book. However, one of the things that I will say about Willow Springs, and this is on the dust jacket of the book. Well, let me say this. I won't read the dust jacket. What I will say is that what Gloria Naylor said about Willow Springs. She said, Willow Springs is a place where magic walks the earth and where history is made flesh and blood. And so this book is the GOAT because no other book puts us in the middle of that sacred space, and no other book talks about this connection to Gullah Geechee people. And this storytelling is a gift. And I want to say that, you know, it precedes Daughters of the Dust, which is such an important, visible narrative about these same people. And like Zora Hurston, she is an archivist. This book is an archive. And so that's why it's the GOAT.
Yes, and I will add to Corey here that we are both from South Carolina, so it is a book that's very important to Native South Carolinians as well. All right, and so I'm going to talk about my book and why I think Invisible Man is the GOAT. First of all, I tell all my students, and I will tell everyone, including my children, that this is an essential text to read. If you want to understand some of the theories and ideas of a Du Bois, talking about double consciousness, talking about the veil, right? Talking about these ideas of not being seen. If you want to understand what Zora Neale Hurston is talking about, their eyes were watching God, and the power of racism and how it envelops the lives of Black people. If you want to hear the story from Mama Day, if you want to understand why the main character in Beloved did the things she did, then you need to understand what Ralph Ellison is talking about invisibility and not being seen. Again, I just overly emphasize that this is something that not only deals with racism, but also deals with patriarchy. And although this book says Invisible Man, there are stories in here that talk about incest and rape and vulnerability of Black women. They talk about Black pain as entertainment with the battle royale in the beginning of the book. And then they also emphasize this idea of not having blind faith in people, and not having blind faith in people without understanding who those people are in your lives. And then he kind of ends with this idea, the same idea he begins with, is that we are invisible because people refuse to see our humanity.
Great. Trying to make it hard.
I believe in this book, so I'm going. Yes.
Well, Beloved I think it's the story itself that is important to Beloved, and therefore I'm going to give you a bit of a synopsis, especially for anyone who hasn't read it yet. So Beloved is about Sethe, the novelist protagonist, who's born a slave but escapes to Ohio, but 18 years later she's still not free because she has too many painful memories from the past, right? And of her Kentucky farm home where so many horrible things happened to her. And Beloved's story is about where Sethe is in that new home, and the ghost of her 2-year-old crawling already daughter comes to the house and haunts the house. This is the daughter she killed when she was threatened with recapture through the Fugitive Slave Act. So the action of the story starts when Beloved takes on body form and enters the house to dramatic effect. She disrupts the love affair that's going on. She forces her sister to overcome her own fears. And ultimately, she empowers Sethe to get over her past, to put her past down and to move forward. So the story itself speaks for the power of storytelling and how much that this has to tell about the African American experience of a horrific past and moving forward.
Well, how do you beat that? In the spirit of the Sankofa bird, we move forward, but we look back. And I have to give you all a little bit of historical context before I get into the actual discussion of why the souls of Black folk is the GOAT. From 711 until about 1490, there was a war that was waged between the Arab world and Europeans. This war is known as the Crusades. And once the Europeans or the Christians were able to oust the Muslims, who were overwhelmingly African, particularly North African, what happens is the Catholic Church puts forth this idea of a just wars doctrine. And the notion of it was to go around the world to find new sources of capital so that these kingdoms could become rich. And one of the things that came from this is that eventually what comes from this are two famous philosophers, Immanuel Kant and G.W.F. Hegel, who argue that African people made no contribution to the spiritual world, and thus they were not human beings. Well, W.E.B. Du Bois in 1903 writes, "The souls of Black folk, this is the spiritual strivings." And he situates each one of those texts with a sorrow song that demonstrates the pain, that demonstrates the resilience. But what also comes from this is when Du Bois writes this book, he's somewhat of an interloper. He's born in New England. He moves to the American South where he is an outsider, but he still identifies as being Black. And he is able to move through and discuss real conversations around the spiritual strivings, around education, around leadership. One of his most important chapters is the coming of John that demonstrates how if Black folk are to become too educated, that they will off-put the rest of the Black community. And so you must be able to move in between all of these particular communities. The other interesting thing about W.E.B. Du Bois' The Souls of Black Folk is the way in which it is written in terms of using the prose. It is written in a literary style, but it incorporates aspects of the social sciences. It incorporates, the archival nature of history. It looks at, the idea of political theory. It brings about the notion that what would eventually become the field of sociology. And so what Du Bois does is he situates the notion of Africana studies, that is scholarship that is produced, but is put on the ground to better Black people's lives. As I draw to a close in terms of where we're going with this, the other aspect that makes Du Bois extremely powerful when we start talking about the GOAT is that because when this book is written, Du Bois is considered to be what they would call an old style Negro. And the youngsters who are really starting to push for dignity present the new Negroes. And with the new Negroes, the political movement of the new Negroes, you have the creation of the Harlem Renaissance. And that's where all of you all's folks come out of. Du Bois is the standard.
Okay. I have, and this wasn't deliberate, but I'm going to take advantage of being the last one here and refer to all of you in my summary of my GOAT. Dr. Scott opened up talking about the reception of Angelou's work by her peers. And I think, you know, little can say more about the greatness of a work when one's own peers acclaim that work. Dr. Claiborne, I don't know how anybody can respond to a book when you call it our Ellis Island. And then Dr. Bonnet Bailey gives us this lens to Ellison through her own, you know, vantage point as a political science, really capturing the relevance of the book in our current moment. And similarly, actually, both Dr. Shatterman and Dr. Hobson and their defense of their book really go to this place of showing this duality of the artistry of their work in terms of it being both poetic, lyrical, as well as historical. And all I have to say to that is I can make that argument all around for my choice. Hurston, to my mind, is arguably the master of words, of language. And foremost, because she defies a long-standing discourse on African-American language as somehow deficient, as somehow not, you know, not adequate to talk about more, you know, complex concepts and experiences of the human self. And Hurston, in this work, is defying all of that. And what she's saying is much like Prince Hall said in 1797 to his brethren when he said, "You don't have to go to Western texts to speak your humanity, to speak your experience." And that's what Hurston is saying here. I don't have to emulate you. And if you want to understand my world, if you want to understand my complexity, you got to come to me. And she says that, and people come to her, and they've done it 5 million times. And I could go on, but I'm going to stop there. Just like I took part of my time to respond to your very strong support of your text, I'm going to open it up for you to do the same.
I want to respond to Dr. Hobson. I want to respond to Dr. Hobson. I mean, I definitely agree with some of the things you were saying, and I like, and we had this discussion before, but I like how Du Bois uses art in the lyrics in the beginning of his chapter, of each chapter, to kind of define what he is going to say in his chapters. But I will also, you know, like to kind of complicate things by thinking about his contemporaries and what they were saying. And specifically, I'm thinking about Anna Julia Cooper and the information that she put forth, in which we see some of it reflected in Du Bois without acknowledgement. Right? And so some of those ideas, so what, yes, so what would you say in response? Yes.
So let me push back. And all of that is valid, okay? So, you know, it's difficult to be up here and I'm not coming here to knock down anybody else's stuff. I'm coming to support this. Yes. But when Du Bois has been commissioned to create this center to study Black life, it presents a different set of problems, because one of the issues with Du Bois, and I have to say this in particular ways, Du Bois always needed the Western gaze. See, double consciousness cannot exist without white people watching. All right, so that is one of the limits of it. Is so Du Bois functions within that system. Whereas, as you stated, as Zora Neale Hurston, I mean, she's sucking cat bones and doing voodoo rituals to try to figure out what's going on with the people in Louisiana. So it's a different approach to it. But the thing about it is, sometimes in order to bend the rules, you got to know the rules. And so using the King's English to beat them over the head. And so I acknowledge that. And there are gender issues, particularly when this is written. I mean, I acknowledge that. The thing, though, that really pushes this out is that during the Harlem Renaissance, when the Harlem Renaissance rises, I mean, they're all taking shots at Du Bois. And I tell young people all the time, and I want y'all to hear this, live long enough, they're gonna put you on the grill too. So it creates generational kind of conversations that allow for us to look at other things. So I hear that.
Well, and then you brought that up. You know, they're taking shots at Du Bois, but let's talk about the way that Du Bois is taking shots at
he
everybody.
took plenty of shots.
Try to drag Zora, right? Like try to, other kind of people who,
exactly.
you know, he decided they weren't doing blackness in the correct way. And I think that one of the things why he wouldn't be the GOAT, because not to say that he didn't contribute obviously to black studies or to black people or even to the form, this thing that he was doing that was in between, you know, story, it's kind of, you know, it's got music in there that, you know, he's playing with form. However, one of the things that I think gets missing is the way in which, and this goes back to the gender question, women were really the ones driving the narrative of black people, keeping the memory keepers, right? Like you gotta have the mamas, the grandmothers, like the women who are sitting and talking in conversation, and that is what that doesn't have. And you cannot tell the story of black people.
I'm asking this now. I gotta ask this question. No, because I'm champion. Listen, I'm the only brother up here. I understand what's going on here now. But could a woman push that at that point in time? No, and what I'm saying.
Julia Cooper?
Anna Julia Cooper did. Ida B. Wells did.
You just got a hero, though, right?
Listen, W.E.B. Du Bois, Booker T. Anybody who argues about W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, I tell them, I said that is a false sense of how you understand history because it pits two people against each other. T. Thomas Fortune was in the game. Ida B. Wells was in the game. William Monroe Trotter. Jesse, there were several folks. So what I'm saying is that anytime you get this dichotomy of this side or that side, particularly in a black world, you know, that's austere. And so the question that I'm asking is in the way in which this is presented is what are the options at the moment? And now we're in 2024. One of the things historians do is we deal with we can't bring presentism into the place. I'm just presenting that idea.
I mean, we're talking about a man who taught Atlanta University in a top hat. Like, who goes to teach a class with a three-piece suit and a top hat, right? Like, I feel like there is a sense of his presence, like he was very into himself, and I do feel like that was his limitation, right? That there was.
Let me push back. I'm gonna give more information about Du Bois than I know.
Okay.
I ran the W.E.B. Du Bois Center, my first job. Du Bois probably had Asperger's. Du Bois was not a part of the upper class. He was never a black elite. He was actually very much working class. There are some social issues. I've got to argue for him right now. Like in a normal day, I'd be like, well, you're right. But this is the thing about it. That's why the notion of the talented 10th presents itself is because he was never a part of it. And the only thing that gave him this right was this intellect, which we still think about today as, if you go get these degrees and do these different things, then you have ascended. But the truth of the matter is, have you really ascended? As I stated, he was an interloper. He was an outsider in this world.
And I will come to Du Bois' defense and add in some other literature here.
Ellison, but
yes, and I'm coming from Amaya too. But to add some other literary texts in here, I'm just reminded and thinking of as Dr. Hobson was talking, Ibram Kendi's book, and in one section of Kendi's book, I'm blanking on the name.
Stamped.
Yep, stamped from the beginning. Yes, he talks about how black people use the strategy of trying to appeal to sensibilities. And so when you're talking about Du Bois wearing a top hat to class, you know, he's trying to appeal for his humanity. Same thing that Ellison comes back to in his book, Invisible Man. This idea of being seen, being visible, right? And so I just want to bring that conversation back. Yes.
And so let's talk about why he doesn't write another book for a long time.
Yes.
After Invisible Man.
Yes.
So let's talk about, you know, exile, right? Like moving to Paris, doing all this other kind of stuff. So when you talk about like being invested in the African American experience and making sure that you know, you stay in that experience. I don't know if Ellison does that, right? I mean, and we can talk about, you know, whether or not, you know, this is about communism, socialism, all that other kind of stuff. We could talk about all of this other kind of stuff, but I think that in a lot of ways, he, like Du Bois, is speaking to a white audience in the 1950s who he has to explain. This is like an explanation. Yeah. You know, a 600-page explanation about what it means to be a black man, but it's not for black people.
What it means, I think it is very much for black people. I think it is giving voice to their, identity. And one thing I was going to say about Maya Angelou, just to kind of get to that book, is that, you know, that's one of the texts that we have at this table that is an autobiography, right? That the rest of the people we're talking about are telling stories of other people, and, you know, they're doing the work and the research for some, you know, and they're telling these stories, but that one is her own story. And I will even say about Ralph Ellison, because as preparing for this talk today, I did read an article, but when they went back and found his writings, they found that he was writing other things, and he was thinking about other things, and they were trying to, they have the archives of the things and the notes and they were writing that gave us more insight into who Ellison was as a person.
And just to that point, we know of the prolific works and ongoing works and contributions that Dr. Maya Angelou made to the canon. So I want to remind everyone of that.
If I could share something with you all, though, if you really wanted to take a shot, so you got to understand all sides of the argument. If you really want to take a shot at Du Bois, I wouldn't go with the top hat. I'd go with how he treated some of the closest people around him.
I was about to say how he planned Yolanda's wedding to County Cullen.
Yeah, but how he treated Yolanda's mother.
Oh, well.
You know, so which demonstrates the level of sexism and misogyny that's around in that particular place.
But I would say though, I would hesitate to collapse the man into the work.
Absolutely.
So I'd be hesitant on doing that. But I could still make my case on why this is a great work in the African American canon. But I think, and that's one of those places where you do see the person struggling in his work.
That's right.
Because there's a lot of struggle in Du Bois's work, and it's a struggle to connect. And that's what I see in this text, but that's also what I see as the deficiency in the text.
We could just make them just like fight, because that's what they would do in public.
I would say in defense of Du Bois, so I can bring it back to my Ralph Ellison, right? That if we're thinking about Du Bois and we're thinking about this book, we need to also think about some of his other works and his connection to the diaspora, including the end of his life when he moved back to Ghana, and the whole idea of the diaspora and being a Pan-African and that he embraced. And we saw Ralph Ellison kind of dealing with some of that as well. We learned about the soapbox preachers. We learned about Roz the Destroyer. We learned about some of the political ideologies that were coming forth in Black America.
And bringing it all back to Dr. Angelou, who also had her own Ghana experience. That is a common thread amongst many of our authors.
As the world forgot Congo.
Yeah. And on that note, in 1937, the anthropologists who could bring these two worlds together, you know, the kind of scientific social science world of anthropology, to the humanity and the experience of again, not just African American people. She writes this when she's in Haiti, and she is inspired by the work that she is doing in Haiti. I would kind of rest my case on bringing us back to to Hurston. I'm going to start off with my passage from Their Eyes. This is early in the text when Janie realizes as a young girl who has been forced into a marriage with a much older man who she finds less than attractive, and how this experience reshapes her vision of the world. So Janie waited a bloom time and a green time and an orange time. But when the pollen again gilded the sun and sifted down on the world, she began to stand around the gate and expect things. What things? She didn't know exactly. Her breath was gusty and short. She knew things that nobody had ever told her. For instance, the words of the trees and the wind. She often spoke to falling seeds and said, "I hope you fall on soft ground," because she had heard seeds saying that to each other as they passed. She knew the world was a stallion rolling in the blue pasture of ether. She knew that God tore down the old world every evening and built a new one by sunup. It was wonderful to see it take form with the sun and emerge from the gray dust of its making. The familiar people and things had failed her, so she hung over the gate and looked up the road towards way off. She knew now that marriage did not make love. Janie's first dream was dead, so she became a woman.
From the Souls of Black Folk, on the experience, on the Black experience, Du Bois writes, "One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body, whose dog strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. The history of the American Negro is the history of this strife, this longing to attain self-conscious manhood or womanhood, to merge his double self into a better and truer self. In this merging, he wishes neither older selves to be lost. He would not Africanize America, for America has too much to teach the world in Africa. He would not bleach his Negro soul in a flood of white Americanism, for he knows that Negro blood has a message for the world. He simply wishes to make it possible for a man or a woman to be both a Negro and an American without being cursed and spat upon by his fellows, without having the doors of opportunity closed roughly in his or her face. This is a full plea for humanity."
Okay, I'm going to read the passage that I'm sure almost everyone would choose out of Beloved. And this is when baby Suggs Holy is in the clearing, and she is the mother-in-law of Sethe, and she is preaching to the former slaves and telling them to love their flesh, to love their eyes, to love their hands. And I'll pick up where she says, "And no, they ain't in love with your mouth. Yonder out there, they will see it broken and break it again. What you say out of it, they will not heed. What you scream from it, they do not hear. What you put into it to nourish your body, they will snatch away and give you leavens instead. No, they don't love your mouth. You got to love it. This is a flesh I'm talking about here. Flesh that needs to be loved. Feet that need to rest and dance. Backs that need support, shoulders that need arms, strong arms, I'm telling you. And oh, my people out yonder, hear me, they do not love your neck, unnoosed and straight. So love your neck. Put a hand on it, grace it, stroke it, and hold it up. And all your inside parts, they just as soon slop for hogs. You've got to love them. The dark, dark liver, love it, love it. And the beat and the beating heart, love that too. More than eyes or feet, more than lungs that have yet to draw free air, more than your life-holding womb and your life-giving private parts. Hear me now, love your heart, for this is the prize."
For my reading, I actually chose two paragraphs from two different sections of Ralph Ellison's text because I think that they they are the bookends of what the whole text is kind of going through and where you start and where you end. And so my first section is from the prologue, and it tells us where he's starting. And then the second section is from chapter 1, because I think this is an idea of where the book kind of ends with this invisible man. And so Ellison goes on, I am an invisible man. No, I'm not a spook like those who hunted Edgar Allan Poe. Nor am I one of your Hollywood movie ectoplasms. I'm a man of substance, of flesh and bone, fiber and liquids, and I might even be said to possess a mind. I am invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. Like the bodiless heads you see sometimes in circus sideshows, it is as though I have been surrounded by mirrors of hard, distorting glass. When they approach me, they see only my surroundings, themselves, or figments of their imagination, indeed everything and anything except me. Nor is my invisibility exactly a matter of a biochemical accident to my epidermis. That invisibility to which I refer occurs because of a peculiar disposition of the eyes of those with whom I come in contact with. A matter of the construction of their inner eyes, those eyes with which they look through their physical eyes upon reality. In that section, he's talking about this idea that you're not seeing the soul in his humanity. And that's where he starts. That's where he starts his book. And then he goes on to say, describes the story of his grandfather dying, and he says, my grandfather is the one. He was the odd old guy. My grandfather and I am told I take after him. It was he who caused the trouble. On his deathbed, he called my father to him and said, son, after I'm gone, I want you to keep up the good fight. I never told you, but our life is a war, and I have been a traitor all my born days, a spy in the enemy's country ever since I gave up my gun back in the Reconstruction. Live with your head in a lion's mouth. I want you to overcome them with yeses, undermine them with grins, agree them to death and destruction. Let them swallow you until they vomit or bust wide open. They thought the old man had gone out of his mind. He had been the meekest of men. The younger children had rushed from the room, the shades drawn, and the flame of the lamp turned so low that it sputtered on the wick, like the old man's breathing. Learn it to the youngins, he whispered fiercely, then he died. And so again, this idea of trying to fight to prove your humanity, trying to fight to prove your visibility, and doing it within the society that you're in. So the same thing we were saying about Du Bois, and we're talking about Toni Morrison and using the King's language, but to make sure that you continue to yes, but you're a spy. And you're talking about words that come out of books. One thing I would say is that from this book, you know, he starts with I am not a spook. We later get the spook who sat by the door, who's also talking about being a traitor and being an enemy, a covert enemy in a society. So.
And we're going to read the prologue that gives you family lineage and the birth of her family story, because that's really what is important. All right, Willow Springs. Everybody knows, but nobody talks about the legend of Sapphira Wade, a true conjure woman, satin black, biscuit cream, red as Georgia clay, depending on which of us takes a mind to her. She could walk through a lightning storm without being touched, grab a bolt of lightning in the palm of her hand, use the heat of the lightning to start kindling under her medicine pot, depending on which of us takes a mind to her. She turned the moon into salve, the stars into swaddling cloth, and healed the wounds of every creature walking up on 2 or down on 4. And it ain't about right or wrong, meaning, Lord, say, we're going to say, it ain't about right or wrong, truth or lies. It's about a slave woman who brought a whole new meaning to both them words, soon as you cross over here from beyond the bridge. And somehow, some way, it happened in 1823. She smothered Bascom Wade in his very own bed and lived to tell the tale for 1,000 days. In 1823, married Bascom Wade, bore him 7 sons in just 1,000 days to put a dagger through his kidney and escape the hangman's noose. Laughing in a burst of flames in 1823, persuaded Bascom Wade to lead deed the slaves every inch of the land of Willow Springs, poisoned him for his trouble to go on and bear 7 sons by person or persons unknown, mixing all of this together and keeping everything that is done shifted down through the holes of time. What you end up with is the death of Baskin-Wade and the fact that there are 7 sons and the fact that we have this land. The wild card in all of this is 1,000 days. And if we put our heads together, we come up with something which ain't possible since Sapphira Wade don't live in the part of our memory we can use to form words. And one thing that I'll say about this is this book is literary Sankofa. This book tells us we all be Gullah. And in thinking about how the legend of Sapphira Wade frames this text, it invites us all to think about how memory is a conjure, right? And that we all have this power to conjure through our stories. So I rest my case.
Mrs. Flowers comes to Maya at a pivotal time in her life where she has been victimized, sexual assault, and has taken on the stance of being mute and not speaking. So I'm going to share with you an excerpt that is from that time period of her life. I have tried often to search behind the sophistication of years for the enchantment I so easily found in those gifts. The essence escapes, but its aura remains. To be allowed, no, invited into the private lives of strangers and to share their joys and fears was a chance to exchange the southern, bitter wormwood for a cup of mead with Beowulf, or a hot cup of tea and milk with Oliver Twist. When I said aloud, it is a far, far better thing that I do than I have ever done, tears of love filled my eyes at my selflessness. On that first day, I ran down the hill and into the road, few cars ever came along it, and had the good sense to stop running before I reached the store. I was liked, and what a difference it made. I was respected, not as Mrs. Henderson's grandchild or Bailey's sister, but for just being Marguerite Johnson. And for this passage, and a myriad of other reasons, I feel Dr. Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings should be crowned the greatest of all time.
Okay, I'm not ready for this. Oh, you're still there.
I think our scholars did an amazing job, but I feel as though I can't score education quite yet. I feel as though I don't fully understand how these works have had an impact on the U.S. education system. I can only talk about my own experience in school with these works.
Yeah, like I grew up in the South, so, and a very white conservative town. I was not required to read any of these texts in schools, and even I came across them in college, and so that was a choice. I had to choose to take African American literature. So I'm glad I came across some of them, but I'm not aware of them in my public education.
Yeah, and in light of books being banned, I think it's important to discuss this.
I'm curious to know if any books have been banned. I know we heard about one book that was banned, but usually that means that something is significant in education.
I think we came to a resolution or a consensus that all of these books have been banned at some point. And in my preparations for today, what I found unique about this text in terms of an educational context was that many high school teachers are using this to teach literary technique. I actually came across a little YouTube lecture where a teacher was asking the students to identify what type of narrative technique was used in the text and talking about the difference of point of view perspectives, first person, third person, etc. So for my defense of this selection as the GOAT, I definitely have seen the impact in the education system. And I think I'd also speak anecdotally. I say everyone kind of has their Maya moment. I know for me it was reciting her poem, Phenomenal Woman, at church. And I was telling my oldest daughter, who's a 15-year-old 10th grader, about that moment, and she had to memorize the poem, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, in middle school, and to this day can recite it in full. So definitely in my lived experience, it's had a major impact within our educational system.
And I'll say this, in 1993, in a collection of essays about Gloria Naylor's work, Henry Louis Gates, who's one of the editors, said this of Naylor and her work in particular. He said, "Perhaps no author has been more immersed in the formal history of the Black literary tradition than Gloria Naylor," right? And he compares her writing to James Baldwin and Toni Morrison, all these other people that we know are banned. And what I will say is about this, so the way this speaks to what Lord, pray. What Naylor does is make sure she is giving you history in ways that maybe people, unless you have to pick up the book to know why you have to ban it, right? Like, there is not an obvious, idea that this book is resistance, perhaps, but it is. It's resisting narrative. It offers, I think, to the, in terms of education, it offers us this kind of pathway to understand your history, the history of slavery, and it might come through family stories. It might come through asking other people questions. But what I think that Naylor does is make sure that this book you will have to read other books when you get to this novel. You will not be able to stop there. You will want to go read slave narratives or literature, enslavement narratives in particular. And I think that opens up a whole other universe, ultimately.
Well, I definitely believe that Invisible Man has, and I know, has educative value, because I was first introduced to this book in my AP English class in high school. And so this was one of the texts that we had to read during my AP English class. And so with this book, it talks about some of the different aspects, again, using this metaphor of being invisible, right? Using this symbolism, using this idea of being invisible, but explaining through the book that he's not really invisible, he's just unseen. And so it definitely has a lot of educational value. And to bring in what Dr. Claiborne just said here, even thinking about resisting, right? Because I read you two passages, and the first one was about being invisible, and the second was about how to continuously resist. And so it definitely has educational value.
And I was one who mentioned that Beloved was already banned and is frequently banned, very frequently. And I can also say that in 2021, after the Virginia governor called for its banning, it became one of the books with the greatest spike in sales in a 24-hour period. So people went out to buy it after hearing that it was going to be banned by him. I actually agree it should not be taught in high school, except maybe on the senior level, maybe with AP students, because it's a hard text and it's a challenging, and it requires a certain amount of emotional maturity that I think is perfect for college level readers. And so I think its educational value is for those readers and for adult readers as well too. And it is, in my opinion, the text of slavery. It gives us that experience that is often silenced and is very little acknowledged. Morrison said she wrote this book because there was no commemoration of slave victims in the United States. And in fact, she said, you can't even find, what did she say? A bench along the road. Mm-hmm. And the Toni Morrison Society has gone around and put about 100 benches along the road in honor of this. But her book is a space where she creates the story of slavery. It's a story that's intense. There's a lot of sexuality, but sexuality is part of freedom and freeing oneself. And so again, it's a story that I think for our students in the college level need to hear this story because it's not been told. And it needs to be told. Despite what they say about CRT and silencing that story, this is the American story. It's a central part of our story, and it needs to be read.
From the founding of this nation, the American experiment has always been somewhat troubled. And W.E.B. Du Bois, as the Souls of Black Folk, calls this out because what it does in particular ways is that his notion or his connection to ideas around the Communist Party, equality, state-sanctioned government that would allow for equality for all folks to be involved, is a stab at capitalism. Du Bois, if we really understand this, from World War II till about 1990, we begin to see this conversation around the Cold War. We begin to see this whole détente, this arms race around, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, particularly, the U.S. against the Russians and the Soviets and all kinds of different things and whatnot. But the way in which that's presented to American education, particularly K through 12 education and college education, is one that capitalism is the way to go because it breeds competition. But the truth of the matter is that Black folk and other marginalized communities will never get access to that kind of capital so that things can be fair and equitable. Du Bois's relationship with the Communist Party, or him being labeled as a communist, forced him to leave this country at the age of 90 and to live and die in Ghana. And so what the Souls of Black Folk and other works by Du Bois is able to do is it is able to show this notion, the American experiment, this notion of the American dream or American democracy as being the sham that it is. That's why the book has been banned.
Okay, what I want to say about Their Eyes in terms of being a banned book, I almost find it a paradox of sorts. We live in a society where we still, demean and criticize what we call the Black vernacular. The power of Their Eyes Were Watching God is to have a text from the opening to its closing that requires you to engage the so-called Black vernacular. And when I think about it, I'm amazed that a form of speech and communication that has for centuries in this country been derided in such a way ironically invokes so much reaction. What is it about this book, spoken in what, has been argued, the simplistic, language of the Negro, going back to these, historical, kind of assessments of Black speech. What is it about this speech that you so undervalue? What is its power to invoke such fear? And that, to me, is the power of the text. And it's also the power of the lyricism of this text. It reminds me of music. How many times have you sung along to a song and not even thought about the music? I mean, the lyrics. But it is the power of the music and the rhythm that speaks to your soul as much as the words themselves. And that's the power of this text. It's not just words on the pages. It's what Morrison calls speakerly writing. This writing speaks. You almost have to read it out loud sometimes because the emotion is so there. And I've taught it, since my graduate years. I've made my now adult children read it, each of them. And I remember when my son, who's now an engineer and was always a math type and didn't want to read anything, and I told him, nope, you got to read this. It's summertime and you have to read this. And he read it. And he didn't want to come and tell me, plainly, this just really moved me. I remember him walking in the room looking at me saying, that book almost brought me to tears. And from a teenage boy, that's just a remarkable reaction to the text. And that's the reaction I get on the college level as well. It is a powerful text, and its power is revealed in, again, how unknowing, to students who don't know it's banned and that they should be, afraid of it in some way, they embrace it wholly. They walk into that world and they come out of it with a different understanding. So it's got that kind of power, and then, as I say, on the other side, the power to make other people afraid. If you're afraid of change, then you want to ban this book. If you're afraid of loving people, if you're afraid of experiencing other people's humanity, then yeah, you're afraid of this book.
So one of the things that I found interesting with what Dr. Elizabeth West said for Their Eyes Were Watching God was highlighting how the language that she chooses to use, that the author chooses to use, is very significant. So I'm wondering how you think that can play into the uniqueness and the cultural significance of that book.
Yeah, so I'm actually a huge fan of Their Eyes Were Watching God. But I was trying to come into this with no bias. It's very hard. So like during it, I was like, oh gosh, talk about the language in there, like the power. And I'm glad we asked the question on the impact on the education, because we got that language. And I think that really plays into how these are crafted. Like each of these are crafted in such a way that is different from a lot of other literary texts. They started new genres in a way.
I think that's especially true for I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, and was brought up of this literary technique that hadn't been seen before. I think was a really great argument and kind of ties in with this. And I also am very partial to I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, and I've been trying to tamp down on that bias, but I found that very resonating.
What did you think about the sociological ideas pointed out from The Invisible Man, and how it seems kind of like a foundational work?
I think you have to first know that Souls of Black Folk came before it and basically helped create this whole new study, sociology. So all these are like, Dr. Hoffman said it, like they build off of this text. So it's so hard because these all are of 20th century, right? But we have Souls of Black Folks from 1903, 120 years. Like it's foundational. But Invisible Man, I will say, it builds on the psychological nature of racism. And you, as a Black person, you think about that almost every day. Like it's insignificant part of your life, and to have a text that talks about it is important.
Yeah, I agree that the impact that it has, and the being able to explore this impact of racism on Black folks that they experience every day and not being seen, and the power of being seen, I think is really important. Yeah, and with the Souls of Black Folk, I read it in school. So I again came in with some bias, but I think there was some good criticism of it, that, there was some sexism in it. And can you really say a book is accessible if it's only for half of the world's population?
Yeah.
That women, especially Black women, are the memory workers. I thought that was an incredibly important point that the Souls of Black Folk doesn't address.
Yeah, I mean, we're two female archivists sitting here. We are literally memory workers. And yet I was like, oh, Souls of Black Folk. But then I was like, I think I'm like taught to like see the male perspective first and not like think of myself as a female or non-binary first, like in text. So, yeah.
One of the really unique points that I found was that Beloved was haunting. There was a haunting aspect of it, and that was kind of different. What do you think about that?
Oh, I read psycho thrillers, mystery novels. Like I read on regular. I'm a fan of ghosts, or not fan of ghosts. They need to stop haunting me, you know, kind of thing. But Beloved like created a new way of looking at it. You know, like it's not a typical novel. It's historical, and then has that mystery and that psychologicalness to it.
And I think also this idea that like our trauma will haunt us. We carry it with us until we address it.
Yeah.
I think is important. I think they gave us a lot to think about as we score these books.
The first finalist is I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. And the second finalist is Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison.
Okay, I can't believe it.
Bull job.
What can I say though? I mean, all 6 books are great. So
what's interesting is like one is really giving the woman's experience, and the other is really giving the man's experience. So it's kind of nice balance that way too.
I wouldn't say it's giving the man experience. I'm still going to have some arguments for the discussion of the woman.
The ghost is clear, huh?
Yes. To me, you know, like I said, the educational value, I'd say all people should read this book.
I feel the same about I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, and I think it's just an excellent reminder too of Black family and the strength and love of that. You know, I didn't really have the opportunity to highlight the sibling relationship in this text, but the brother and sister bond between Maya and her brother, Bailey, is just outstanding and just brings fond memories of childhood and what it's like to grow up with that nuclear family intact and what it's like to have that sibling as a partner in your childhood.
Well, I'll make the argument again as a political scientist that one thing you do understand in Invisible Man is the numerous political ideologies that have ran throughout the Black experience. And so he's talking about Black nationalism and communism, and he's talking about Marxism even. And so all of these ideologies that are foundational to understanding political attitudes and ideas is expressed in here as well. So I still go for Invisible Man.
I think the ideologies are critical for our understanding, but the lived experience, just, you can't beat that. And her ability to look back with that mind's eye and that lens over the scope of a lifetime with the lived experience is phenomenal.
So again, our two finalists texts, Ellison's Invisible Man and Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. We get the honor of ranking these two now. They will be sealed votes, and we will give our rankings, and we're going to hold all to suspense and get the final revelation and announcement in the readathon along the way. Until then, we get to enjoy the readathon and await the announcement of the GOAT for the genre of African American literature. I do want to take this final moment to thank our panelists who participated. I'm going to have to go console myself. My book didn't win. It's going to be a rough night. But it was as I had hoped. This was a lot of fun. I think a lot of learning and sharing about a fantastic canon was exemplified here. And I also want to thank our colleagues over at the library who didn't vote for my book. But again, it was great. And thank you again for helping to show why books matter.
All right, the moment is here. I don't know about you, but I'm kind of nervous about all of this. It has finally come. Okay, we're talking about the two top finalists, Maya Angelou, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Now, originally Dr. Heather Scott nominated this book. She couldn't be here, so Dr. Elizabeth West is standing in for her. She is in purple, if you can see her. Ralph Ellison, Invisible Man, nominated by Professor Lakita Bonnet-Bailey. Okay, so this is the moment. A drum roll, please. Can we have a drum roll? We got a drum roll? All right, good, good, good. I'm opening the envelope. You see, the winner is for our GOAT, the Invisible Man, Dr. Lakita Bonnet-Bailey, Ralph Ellison. Congratulations. Congratulations! That is amazing. Okay, this is yours, by the way. Please, please. You got to take it home.
Yes, I will.
I mean, tell me. There you go. Pose for the cameras, everybody. This is the real deal. Yes. All right. Just hold it up. There we go. That's it. You got your name and everything. Tell me why. Tell me how this happened. Why did you think it was Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison? What did you think about that book that would make it the GOAT for this year?
Well, Invisible Man is a classic, and I think that the issues and topics that are discussed in Invisible Man are still really relevant right now today. And so he talks a lot about racism, about this idea of being invisible, of not being seen as a human, as a person. And these are still issues that we deal with today. And so it is one of the books that I encourage everyone to read if you haven't read it, and it's one that I assign in my classes as well, but it is a phenomenal book, and it is very, very relevant today.